Oh.
There we'll go.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. The Joint Government Operations Committee is now called to order on Thursday, February the 19th, 2026 for self-sufficiency hearings and rule review. Before we begin this morning's business, are there any personal orders? Seeing none, we're here today for two self-sufficiency hearings and rule review. Today's self-sufficiency hearings are required by statute to discuss health-related and regulatory boards required to be self-sufficient operating in the negative for 2 consecutive years. We'll hear from these entities that fit this description. After an entity makes their presentation, members will have the opportunity to ask the questions. Motions and votes are not required at self-sufficiency hearings. The typical procedure during a self-sufficiency hearing is to allow the entity to explain why they've operated in the red, allow the entity to explain how they'll correct the issue, and the committee moves on to the next item. The entities that are here before us today fall into 2 separate subcommittees. The first subcommittee is Education, Health, and General Welfare. This portion of the hearing will be chaired by Senator Rose and will be the first of several items heard today. From there, we'll move to our second subcommittee, which is Commerce, Labor, Transportation, and Agriculture, which will be chaired by Representative Reedy for the remaining items. While not everyone here is a member of the subcommittees, all full committee members may ask questions. Only those on the subcommittee may vote on any potential motion made while the subcommittee's meeting. Sign-up sheets for public comment are on the table in the front. After the conclusion of the 2 self-sufficiency hearings, the gavel will be returned back to me for our monthly rule review meeting. Please keep in mind, we will be hearing 2 separate rule review agendas, January's as well as February's. Since we were snowed out last month, we've had to double up a little bit. One last note before we begin. After the conclusion of the first and the second self-sufficiency hearing, we will need to pause for a minute or 2 before gaveling into the next meeting in order to allow AV staff to make sure that the online streaming reflects the accurate information for which the meeting is taking place. I hope all this makes sense. Are there any questions from the members? Seeing none. All right. With that, I will now, one more announcement. We're going to place an order for pizza. This for the members. Sorry, folks. We're going to place an order for pizza about 11 o'clock. Hopefully it'll be here 11:30, 12. As you want, go back to the room, the cloakroom, grab you a slice if you need to get through, and we'll power through this as best we can. Thanks, folks. With that, I'll turn the gavel over to Senator Rose to chair the first self-sufficiency hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. We're here for the Education, Health, and General Welfare Joint Evaluation Self-Sufficiency Hearing for health-related boards. Madam Secretary, please take the roll.
Senator Crowe is here. Senator Jackson is here. Senator Oliver. Senator Seal is here. Senator Sutherland is here. Chairman Rose is here. Representative Crawford is here. Representative Glenn is here. Representative Haynes is here. Representative McKenzie is here. Representative Rutter is here. Vice Chair Fritz. Vice Chair Fritz is here. You have a quorum.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you taking the roll for us. We're going to ask the Health Department to come up, and I believe they're going to be reporting on every one of these boards. And let me tell you how this is going to work. They're going to make a presentation. If you have a question, please offer it. If you don't, that'd be good too, maybe even better. And audience, you also will have a chance to ask a question. If there are no questions asked, we will move on to the next board. So Ms. Putnam, please tell us who you are, who you're with, and you may proceed to share with us about the Board of Chiropractors. Y'all turn Ms. Putnam on, if you would.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning. My name is Jennifer Putnam. I'm the Assistant Commissioner for the Division of Health Licensure and Regulation.
Mike Critchfield, Legislative Liaison with the Department of Health.
The first board for the committee's review is the Board of Chiropractic Examiners. In fiscal year 2024, the board's expenditures exceeded revenues by $30,645. In fiscal year 2025, the board's expenditures exceeded revenues by $29,482. However, the board does maintain a reserve balance of $638,916, which exceeds the division's reserve balance guideline by $25,315. A fee increase discussion is anticipated to take place at the end of fiscal year 2026.
Maybe.
That concludes our initial presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
All right, thank you, Ms. Putnam. Appreciate the report. Any questions from our committee? Seeing none, any questions from the audience? Seeing none, Ms. Putnam, go to your next one, please, which I believe is the Board of Dentistry.
Thank you, Chairman. In fiscal year 2024, the board's expenditures exceeded revenues by $1,040,331. In fiscal year 2025, the board's expenditures exceeded revenues by $921,649. The board maintains a reserve balance of $1,474,085, which falls below the division's reserve guideline by $2,475,102. As a result of this reserve balance, the board approved a fee increase during its meeting on January 8th of this year. That concludes our presentation. I'm happy to answer.
All right, thank you. Any questions from our committee? Representative Hardaway, you're recognized.
Thank you, sir. And good morning.
Good.
The fee increase is targeting what deadline for getting the reserves back up?
So the projected time frame in which the fee increase would actually spin down the reserves, I'll defer to our fiscal director, Matthew McSpadden. They typically run on a 2-year cycle for us to get an idea of what impact it's having, as the renewal cycle is every 2 years. That fee would be implemented. So I'll defer to Mr. McSpadden to give a more specific answer for you.
Okay,
Go ahead.
so you're saying that whenever the fee increase is put in place, it's for a minimum of 2 years automatically?
No, sir, it's not for a minimum of 2 years. The 2 years will be the first opportunity we can have an accurate projection of how that increase helped to remedy the situation, since we won't have all of the licensees to have paid that new increased amount until a completion of 2 years when they've all renewed.
Okay, now I'm confused. If you put the fee increase in place, how long before you can change the fee increase?
A fee increase can be changed at any time. So we'll have to go through the rulemaking process and come before this committee for review. So at the January 8th meeting, the board did vote to increase their fee. That starts the rulemaking process. It will go through all the respective internal reviews and then ultimately come before this committee for final review before it is then sent to the Secretary of State's office, where after 90 days, an effective date will be issued. Upon that effective date, that's when the new increase will be available. After the completion of 2 years of that new amount is when we will be able to project if the amount that was believed to be accurate either needs to remain the same or needs to be increased or decreased again.
All right, Mr. Chairman, we can hear from him, but what I'm trying to get to is, because this is, you've been here for how long?
With the state, sir?
Yes.
Almost 15 years.
Okay, so you know that myself and
Yes, sir.
Senator Bell were pushing for self-sufficiency. And what I'm trying to figure out is if we become better at projections, or are we still riding the same train? So I'll hear from him, but that's really my concern, that we haven't gotten any smarter in figuring out how to put the necessary increases in place, how to do the projections more precisely, so that we don't have the up and down, and we'll have a tighter graph line.
Thank you. Matt McSpadden, Fiscal Director for Health Licensure and Regulation. Thank you for having us here today. I believe, to answer your question, the fee proposal that the board voted on in January was based on some of the things that we heard when we were before this committee previously, and some of the things that were sent back to us. And so based on those projections, we would be looking at self-sufficiency within 3 fiscal years. once the rule is in place. There are some licensure and regulation system upgrades that we're doing across all health-related boards that would also have to come from the reserve balances and the revenues from this board. And so we would be looking at self-sufficiency within 3 years based on the fee proposal that was before the board in January.
And how do we arrive at the 3-year target?
So we make those calculations based on the number of current licensees that are governed by the board and their 2-year renewal cycle, like Ms. Putnam said. And we take the fees that we've done and we multiply that by the number of licensees that would be annually renewing. And we compare that against their annual expenditures and how much extra revenue beyond what's coming in right now would be coming in based on those fee increases.
Okay, I thank you for the information, but my question was, how did we determine that 3 years would be the time frame for getting the reserves back in balance and creating the self-sufficiency? Why 3 years?
So we estimate our expenditures at a growth rate of 1% for this projection, and we estimate our revenue at a growth rate of 0.5%. And then we're adding in that additional revenue that would come from those fee increases and butting that up against the expenditures. And after 3 years, once the licensure and regulation system expenditures are also accounted for, at that 3-year mark, the revenue would exceed the expenditures.
Representative Hardaway, let me interrupt just a minute. I'm going to ask us to go out of session, go to recess. I'm going to ask our legal advisor, Doug Garrett, to try to explain what's going on. I think they've done a good job explaining it, but hopefully he can explain why we do what we do and why we're doing what we're doing today. And it may alleviate any questions going forward. I'm not saying you can't ask questions, but this is a standard process that they use. So, Mr. Garrett, we're out of session, recess, and would you please help us with this matter, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Doug Garrett with the Office of Legal Services. And as has been explained by the department here this morning, these numbers are a moving target. They have balances that they have to abide by. I think the rule of thumb has always been 2.5 times their annual operating expenses of what they maintain in their reserve. Jennifer, you can jump in if I'm wrong there. But the issue here is that these numbers, this balance is sort of a moving target. And so when the departments come before us to raise fees in response to appearing here at the self-sufficiency hearing, they are really just projecting over the course of a 3-year cycle. So it's really difficult to predict from one year to the next where they are relative to numbers. That could be for any number of reasons. They could be that in one fiscal year they had an significant increase in contested case hearings that increased their legal fees. They could. I think we've even had an entity that moved to a different location that increased their fees. There are practitioners, licensees that move in and out of these professions. So you may have a couple of hundred people that have left the profession that affects the regulatory aspect and the fiscal aspect of how they're conducting their business. So if they're projecting 3 years under a fee, then that's just that. It's just a projection. And so I'm sure that they are, I don't want to speak for them, but I'm sure that they're also monitoring the effect of this fee increase. And then at the end of whatever period that they determine is necessary, then they will then pivot if they have to at that point. But these 3-year projections are just that, based on the information I've provided.
Mr. Garrett, thank you for the explanation. I want to make sure, if it's possible, we ask him a question now. If you have any question about how this functions and why it functions the way it does, are there any questions to legal advisor Doug Garrett from our panel?
Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, saying Representative Hardaway, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. I always enjoy listening to Attorney Garrett. And my goal is to figure out why, when we start looking at where we want to be and how soon we want to be there, why do we not say 2 years and figure out what the fee increases need to be for 2 years so that we don't get caught with these, the longer that we go without adequate reserves, the less prepared we are to deal with the emergencies that arise, whether it's investigations or personnel issues, to keep it self-sufficient. So that's the problem I'm having, and I'm not getting any clarity there. So when I ask Attorney Garrett, is there anything
Do you want to?
in the
Do you want to take
the
this?
statute that says that you will figure out how to become, when you make your projections and your adjustments in your budget, how to become self-sufficient if you've fallen out within the next 2-year period?
Doug Garrett, you are recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Doug Garrett with Legal again. And Representative Hardaway, that's a really good question. And in response, I would say, aside from the APA, the UAPA, which authorizes the agencies to promulgate rules, these rulemaking, these rules that are promulgated to increase fees or to decrease fees or to implement fees, generally speaking, take about 6 to 9 months. So you're looking at a year there potentially for them to implement. And that's not the case in all situations, of course. But then it'll take another year beyond that for them to sort of evaluate and monitor in conjunction with these fluctuating circumstances, for them to get a better idea as to where we are or where they are with their bottom line. So a third year is not out of the norm, so to speak. I think that allows them sufficient time, and this is just my opinion. I think it allows the entities sufficient time to really have a feel for where they are relative to that new bottom line.
Thank you, Mr. Garrett.
All
I
right,
appreciate it.
thank you, Chairman.
Any further questions? All right, Representative Glenn, you're recognized.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just real quick for the attorney, so really and truly what we're doing is we're not saying yes or no. We're just here to listen
That's right.
and say, okay, thank you for the update. Is that pretty much what we're doing?
You're recognized. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes.
Okay.
Representative Glenn, we're here to listen to why they are where they are, why their revenues haven't covered their expenses for 2 consecutive years, and to hear their response as to what they intend to do going forward to resolve it.
Thank you for that question, Representative Glenn. And keep in mind, we can always call these boards back in front of us and resolve an issue if we see it getting out of hand. And I promise you, Ms. Putnam will let us know. So next one is, okay, we're back in the session. Any comments or questions from our audience? Seeing none, we will move on to the Board of Dispensing Opticians. Ms. Putnam, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. In fiscal year 2024, the board's expenditures exceeded its revenues by $27,812. In fiscal year 2025, the board's expenditures exceeded revenues by $22,140. However, this board does maintain a reserve balance of $751,348, which does exceed the division's reserve balance guideline by $608,738. As a result of this reserve balance, the board had a fee decrease in fiscal year 2023.
All right, thank you, ma'am. Any questions from our committee? Seeing any from our audience? Seeing none, we'll move on to the Board of Occupational Therapy. Ms. Putnam, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. In fiscal year 2024, the board's expenditures exceeded revenues by $20,245. In fiscal year 2025, the board's expenditures exceeded revenues by $89,730. The board maintains a reserve balance of $142,026, which does fall below the division's reserve balance guideline by $511,646. As a result of this reserve balance, the board approved a fee increase at its October 24th, 2024 meeting.
All right, thank you for that report. Any questions from our committee? Seeing none, any questions from our audience? Seeing none, Ms. Putnam, thank you. You may move on to the Board of Nursing. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. In fiscal year 2024, the board's expenditures exceeded revenues by $1,155,843. In fiscal year 25, the board's expenditures exceeded revenues by $2,487,597. This board maintains a reserve balance of $3,494,880, which does fall below the division's reserve balance guideline by $16,410,250. As a result of this reserve balance, the board has approved a fee increase, and it is set to take place April 8th of this year.
Thank you so much, Ms. Putnam. Appreciate that. Any questions from our committee? Seeing none. From our audience? Seeing none. Ms. Putnam, move on to the Board of Optometry, please.
Thank you, Chairman. In fiscal year 2024, the board's expenditures exceeded revenues by $49,067. In fiscal year 25, the board's expenditures exceeded revenues by $83,240. However, this board does maintain a reserve balance of $539,841, which exceeds the division's reserve balance by $16,213. They are approaching the end of a controlled spend down of that reserve balance, so there will likely be a discussion for a fee increase at the conclusion of fiscal year 2026.
All right. Thank you for that report. Any questions from our committee? Seeing none from the audience. All right. Seeing none, Ms. Putnam, you may move on to the Board of Osteopathic Examination which one did you just do? Nursing?
I just did optometry. You are correct, sir.
That's
It
what
is
I
Board of
thought.
Osteopathic.
Osteopathic Examination. You're recognized. You may proceed.
Thank you, Chairman. In fiscal year 24, the board's expenditures exceeded revenues by $106,042. In fiscal year 25, the board's expenditures exceeded revenues by $36,808. However, this board maintains a reserve balance of $1,290,284, which exceeds the division's reserve balance guideline by $220,179. The excess balance is about 6 months worth of expenditures, and with the negative net finish over the last 2 years, which is why we're before you today, we believe that it's best to wait till the end of the fiscal year to have the discussion regarding a reduction. If this board continues to finish in a negative position, we will continue spending down the reserve balance, and if they finish in a positive position, then we will hold a fee reduction discussion at the end of the year as needed.
All right. Thank you again for your report. Any questions from our committee? Seeing none. From our audience? Seeing none. You are recognized on the Board of Physical Therapy Examiners.
Thank you, Chairman. In fiscal year 24, the board's expenditures exceeded revenues by $152,471. In fiscal year 25, the board's expenditures exceeded its revenues by $91,349. This board maintains a reserve balance of $216,175, which falls below the division's reserve balance guideline by $1,026,126. As a result of this reserve balance, the board had a fee increase that went into effect December 31st of 2025.
Ms. Putnam, thank you again. Any questions from our committee? Seeing none. From the audience? Seeing none, you may move on to the Board of Physical Therapy Examiners. We just did that one. My bad, I didn't mark it off. Board of Podiatry.
Thank you, Chairman. In fiscal year 2024, the board's expenditures exceeded revenues by $17,001. In fiscal year 25, the board's expenditures exceeded revenues by $17,337. The board maintains a reserve balance of $171,737, which falls below the division's reserve balance guideline by $26,138. As a result of this reserve balance, the board was presented with and discussed a fee increase at the January 14th, 2026 meeting, and further discussion will take place at the May meeting scheduled for May 8th.
Thank you once again. Any questions from our committee? Seeing none from the audience, seeing none, Ms. Putnam, you may move on to the Advisory Committee for Acupuncture.
Thank you, Chairman. In fiscal year 2024, the board's expenditures exceeded revenues by $9,784. In fiscal year '25, the board's expenditures exceeded its revenues by $9,027. However, this board maintains a reserve balance of $243,225, which exceeds the division's reserve balance guideline by $133,997. The reserve balance is 2.5 years of expenditures, and a mid-year presentation was presented to the committee on February 12th, and a fee reduction will be discussed at their next meeting.
All right, thank you again for that report. Any questions from our committee? Representative Hardaway, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. Which board was that?
The Committee for Acupuncture.
All right, for some reason, I'm showing 4.5 years of expenditures in reserve. I think you said 2 something.
The reserve balance is approximately 2.5 years of expenditures in addition to their 2-year standard balance.
Okay, so the 4.5 is what?
Is 2 years of the 2.5 years of the reserve, and then the 2-year of the standard balance, which is how we arrived at the 4.5.
Okay. Chairman Rose, be real short on this. One of the things, and also reference back to the Board of Dispensing Opticians, one of the things we were concerned with when we started this discussion on self-sufficiency was that we were over-collecting. It was being held, these fees were being held, and at that time, I'm trying to see who was here at the time, but Governor Bredesen was raiding these reserves and treating them as putting them into the general fund. So that's what gives me concern about them being more efficient as we move along year to year. I'd like to see us be better at projections. But that's really how we got started in all this, Mr. Chairman. We had the governor stealing money that was going towards licensing and regulatory fees and taking it and putting it into the general fund. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Representative Hardaway. I'm going to ask us to go back. We need to answer that. If that's correct, we need to know. If it's not, we'll recognize. We'll go out of session. Recognize our legal advisor, Doug Garrett. You are recognized, Mr. Garrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Doug Garrett with the Office of Legal Services again. To your point, Representative Hardaway, those were statutory sweeps that occurred during the administration you referenced. They may have occurred subsequent to that. I'd have to look up the current statute, the language, to see when the last time that was and what department it was the sweep occurred. But again, to your point, that did occur back during the period you referenced. But it is statutory.
It is statutory, but to your knowledge, we have not done it during the Lee administration, to my knowledge.
No.
Go ahead, Mr. Garrett.
Thank you, Doug Garrett again. Not to my knowledge, but I would like to check just to confirm that, but I don't believe that those sweeps have occurred at all.
Thank you for that explanation. We'll go back into session. Representative Hardaway, good question. And if you don't mind, let's get an answer for you and for the committee, and we'll follow up on that. Good question. Thank you. Anything else? Representative Hardaway. All right. Thank you. Any questions from our audience? Seeing none, we will go on to the licensing nursing home administrators. Representative Ms. Putnam, you are recognized.
I appreciate that upgrade, though, Chairman.
You're
Thank you so
welcome.
much.
I'm not sure it's an update. Let's pay, I promise you.
Thank you, Chairman. In fiscal year 2024, the board's expenditures exceeded revenues by $146,265. In fiscal year 2025, the board's expenditures exceeded revenues by $94,773. The board currently has a negative reserve balance of $131,973, which falls below the division's reserve balance guideline by $496,594. As a result of this reserve balance, the board currently has a fee increase in process, and for an additional point of knowledge, the reason for the deficit was this occurred as a result of the legislation that separated the Health Facilities Commission into its own independent commission. So billing that was being done to the nursing home administrators as one complaint ultimately then became two complaints. When you would go to do the facility at that time, we would also investigate the administrators in question. When they became their own entity, the investigations were separate of the facility versus the administrator licensed by this board. And that is what resulted in the duplicative costs that has since been rectified in what is being taken place with this fee increase.
All right, thank you, Ms. Putnam. Any questions from our committee? Seeing none from the audience, seeing none, Ms. Putnam, thank you for that explanation. And we'll move on to the Committee for Clinical Perfusionist. You're recognized, Ms. Putnam.
Thank you, Chairman. In fiscal year 2024, the board's expenditures exceeded revenues by $4,515. In fiscal year 2025, the board's expenditures exceeded revenues by $18,968. However, this board maintains a reserve balance of $147,647, which exceeds the board's reserve guideline by $70,707. Expenditures have grown and revenue has decreased over the last few years with this profession. So while the board is trending in a negative position to spend down that excessive balance, we will continue to monitor the balance reduction and make appropriate recommendations at the end of fiscal year 26.
All right, thank you so much. Any questions from our committee, from our audience? Seeing none, Ms. Putnam, you are recognized on the Polysomnography Professional Standards Committee.
Thank you, Chairman. In fiscal year 24, the board's expenditures were $16,930. In fiscal year 2025, the board's expenditures exceeded revenues by $8,935. This board currently has a negative reserve balance of $21,061, which falls below the division's reserve balance guideline by $102,926. A fee increase went into effect in December of 2025, and the reserve balance is projected to be in the black by fiscal year 2028.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Putnam. Appreciate that report. Any questions from our committee? Seeing none from our audience. All right, seeing none, we will move on to the Board of Respiratory Care.
Thank you, Chairman. In fiscal year 2024, the board's expenditures exceeded revenues by $2,992. In fiscal year 2025, the board's expenditures exceeded revenues by $129,577. However, this board maintains a reserve balance of $936,441, which exceeds the division's reserve balance guideline by $278,468. This excess reserve balance is, again, a year's worth of expenditures in addition to the 2-year standard balance. However, this board has finished significantly in the red for 2 of the last 3 years. So the board is trending in a negative position to spend down that excess balance. And as a result, we will continue to monitor the balance reduction and make appropriate recommendations at the end of fiscal year 26.
Thank you, Ms. Putnam. Any questions from our committee? Seeing none from the, Representative Hardaway, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. Just an observation. Perhaps if you had a column that showed the projections of the year when you are going to be back in balance, that would be helpful. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Representative Hardaway. Any further questions from the committee? Seeing none from our audience. All right, seeing none, we will go on to the Medical Laboratory Board. Ms. Putnam, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. In fiscal year 2024, the board's expenditures exceeded revenues by $182,900. In fiscal year 2025, the board's expenditures exceeded revenues by $291,830. The board currently has a reserve balance of $1,575,262, which falls below the division's reserve balance guideline by $156,557. As a result of this reserve balance, the board will be presented with a fee increase proposal at their next meeting, which is scheduled for April 24th, 2026.
Ms. Putnam, thank you for that report. Any questions from our committee? Seeing none from our audience? Seeing none. Folks, we are on our last report, at least for our committee. Ms. Putnam, you're recognized on the Board of Emergency Management Services.
Thank you, Chairman. In fiscal year 2024, the board's expenditures exceeded revenues by $14,599. In fiscal year 25, the board's expenditures exceeded revenues by $432,400. $412. The reserve balance for this board is 0. As pursuant to statute, the board is not required to maintain a reserve. If lacking funds, it is pulled from the general fund. That concludes our presentation. I'm happy to answer any
Ms.
questions.
Putnam, thank you. We got a question for Representative Glenn. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just out of curiosity, so many of these like 2023, 24 deficits were relatively small, but in 24, 25, I mean, they really jumped. Is there an underlining factor to why those numbers jumped so high in terms of deficit?
There is, Representative. I appreciate that question. So there are 3 main factors that go into play when it comes into those increases. First, that was when the state did their market study and increased state salaries. So that also has to be covered by the boards based on the percentage of their licensees. So that the second would be an increase in investigations. As the professions grow, we see an increase in complaint and investigations. So those costs also go up, which must be covered by the expenses of the board. And then thirdly are our technological costs. As we improve and modernize our system and as STS improves things such as cloud storage and things of that nature, we also have to make those changes as well. And so additional costs come into play there. So those 3 factors are why in those 2 specific years you see such a significant increase.
All right, thank you for that question, Representative Glenn. Any further questions from our committee? Any questions from our audience? Before we conclude, let me just say to you, Ms. Putnam and your staff, we appreciate your grasp of knowledge and that what you bring to the table when we have these questions, and we do appreciate all that you do. With that, we have met our statutory requirement to hold a public hearing, and no action is required at this time. Without objection, we're going to adjourn to the Education, Health, and General Welfare, and I think I'm going to turn it back over to you, Chairman Lafferty, because I think you don't need to do that. You don't need a pause. Okay. Representative Reedy, I think it's you. We do need to pause. Okay. Okay. Chairman Reedy, someone will give you the nod when to go. It won't be me.